Asset inflation is amazing for the people who hold the assets. The question is, does the asset inflation stop? But if the asset inflation just continues, then there's no problem. They're never gonna let the asset prices go down for a prolonged period of time. Doesn't mean asset prices can't go down, but if you're a young person and asset prices go down, you're like salivating. You're just like, just buy more because these idiots are gonna just pump the prices back up. Bitcoin has done exactly what it said it was gonna do. Bitcoin's monetary policy gives perfect guidance. The Fed, all over the place. When you compare the two systems, one is believable and one is questionable.
Is Bitcoin the key to freedom in the digital age? Anthony Pompliano dives deep into the clash between Bitcoin's algorithmic precision and the Federal Reserve's erratic monetary experiments. From its role as digital gold to its promise of inclusion and equality, Bitcoin is redefining what it means to own the future. Stick around to learn why even the Fed may secretly agree with the internet's favorite currency.
Finally realize the game has changed. If you go back and you look at the last 16 years since the global financial crisis, the Fed has stepped in and they have broken the financial market in terms of how it used to work. It no longer works the same way. And so investors, I think, kind of felt this. They had a hunch. They had a hypothesis that this was true, but in 2020, we proved it to be true. Because what investors felt through the 2010s was every time we get near a market crash, every time we get near a market downturn, every time we get near a potential recession, the Fed seems to become a little bit more aggressive. They begin to intervene. They begin to stimulate the economy. And so the central bankers invented this brand new tool called quantitative easing, where they were going to simultaneously suppress interest rates and they were going to print money. There is no cleaner test than lock everyone in their homes and don't allow their businesses to operate. That's a pretty big crisis. And so what happened? Fear spread like a true virus. And all of a sudden, everyone was like, oh my God, asset prices are going to fall. And people just started selling everything. They're selling stocks, bonds, crypto, anything they possibly could, and they wanted dollars. In that moment, the Federal Reserve had to show their true colors. It's kind of like at the end of a poker hand, you got to lay the cards out. What are you holding, right? Either you put up or you shut up. And when they laid their hand down, it was exactly what investors had hypothesized about, that the Federal Reserve will not allow the market to have a prolonged bear market. The Federal Reserve is going to suppress interest rates and print money, and they are going to ensure that asset prices continue to go up and to the right. And so that's what we did. 2 emergency rate cuts down to 0% interest rates, and we printed trillions of dollars. That one moment of 2020 of actually confirming what investors already thought told every single investor one message: get the hell out of the safe zone and push out on the risk curve. And so I now believe that it is nearly impossible in the United States of America for us to see an 18-month or longer downturn. We can have 3 months, 6 months, maybe even 12 months. If you go back to 2020, we saw stock prices go down for about a year. They started to go down in the beginning of 2022, and they bottomed by the end of the year. And so then we went back up. October of 2022 was the bottom of the stock market. If you look at crypto, similar thing. I think it was like November, December was the top of the market in 2021. By November of 2022, bottom, we go back up. And so we didn't even really get a full 12-month market downturn until we bottom. And so I don't believe that we can get 18 months or more. Why? It's because we are addicted to cheap capital. We have to have that capital coming in. Now, what's fascinating about this experiment in 2022 was that they kept hiking interest rates, but asset prices bottomed and went back to all-time highs. So even though interest rates went to over 5%, we still got all-time high in asset prices. Why? Because the Federal Reserve got overwhelmed by the fiscal policy of us printing hundreds of billions of dollars that then got pushed into the market. Asset inflation is amazing for the people who hold the assets. The question is, does the asset inflation stop? But if the asset inflation just continues, then there's no problem. And so that's the ultimate question is, will the asset inflation stop? Now, here's what's fascinating. We're talking today about residential real estate, and home affordability in America is the worst it's been in like 40 years, right? If you go back to the global financial crisis, that quote unquote real estate bubble popped. Well, if you just held the real estate till today, you're good. So what ends up happening with these kind of larger asset classes is there can be corrections along the way, but people who just have a long time horizon, they're going to be fine because again, the structure is very different. And so what ended up happening in the real estate crisis is that they were manipulating the market. As they manipulated the market from the central bank, people took more risk. If people take more risk, then they start inventing all kinds of new financial instruments The big one, as that book describes, is the CLOs and CDOs. And so once you start to do stuff like that, where people are issuing risk, essentially, and then they're selling it to somebody else, so they are just in the transaction business, not in the risk-taking business, what do you think's going to happen? And so it all feeds on itself, but it comes back to the Federal Reserve. And so they have now proven that there's a safety net. And so if you know that they are going to create quote unquote inflation, well, what do? You want to benefit from it. Where is the inflation going to show up? It's going to show up in asset prices. So what do? You go and you invest rather than hold cash. And I think that's really the game here, is that asset inflation is something that nobody was really talking about because they had these other names, booms and busts and all the stuff. But how long does it have to go for?
Anthony Pompliano detailed how the Federal Reserve's monetary policies since the 2008 financial crisis have reshaped the economy. He explained how quantitative easing, interest rate manipulation, and fiscal interventions have created a system that prioritizes asset inflation at the expense of long-term stability. Investors, recognizing this pattern, now treat market downturns as buying opportunities, knowing the Fed will inevitably intervene to pump asset prices back up. Pompliano contrasted this with Bitcoin's algorithmic monetary policy, which has stayed consistent and transparent, earning trust as a reliable store of value. Stay tuned as Pompliano reveals how this shift is reshaping global perceptions of money and the financial system.
And so once you start to understand that, you say, literally, think of something worse for the economy than we are going to lock everyone in their homes for months. The velocity of money ground to a halt. People were selling asset prices. Bitcoin dropped 50% in a single day. What else could you possibly come? The dinosaur's going to come back? Are aliens going to visit us? Is a comet going to hit Earth? Like, to think of like whatever crazy thing you could think of. It's probably still not worse than we're going to lock the entire country in their home for months. And so if you say to yourself, okay, if it can't be worse than that from what could happen to the economy, and we know what the response is, they're never going to let the asset prices go down for a prolonged period of time. Doesn't mean asset prices can't go down, but if you're a young person and asset prices go down, you're like salivating. You're just like, just buy more because these idiots are going to just pump the prices back up. And so that's, if you go back to 2020, that's what the smart people did. Asset prices fell, they didn't sell anything, and they just bought more. And by the end of the year, we're back to all-time highs. Genius. The Fed has been highly inconsistent over the last 15 years. Bitcoin has done exactly what it said it was going to do. Bitcoin's monetary policy gives perfect guidance. The Fed, all over the place. When you compare the two systems, one is believable and one is questionable. One is predictable and one is unpredictable. And so when you start to see these differences, you always say, no wonder so many people on the internet who question the Fed, who don't necessarily believe what they're saying, are also being attracted to Bitcoin as an asset that has a algorithmic monetary policy. And so I think that's really what becomes fascinating, is they call the bluff on one hand, and they compete on the other hand. Now, I did think that I have a theory that something has changed in the world and people haven't yet caught on. I think the Federal Reserve had a meeting about Bitcoin. Something changed, but they now have changed their tune and they're going to call Bitcoin digital gold. Jerome Powell said it at the Deal Book Summit. They put out a paper recently calling Bitcoin digital gold. There was a meeting. A talking point like that does not show up in two places by accident. Somebody in the United States government, the Fed, Treasury, whatever, they all got together. Let's talk about this. What's our narrative? And they have decided that Bitcoin is digital gold. That's how they're going to describe it. What I love about this is they're right. That is what it is. It is a digital store of value. And so now what we have is we have a point of common ground. The internet believes that Bitcoin is digital gold. They believe that it's the best store of value. The Federal Reserve is implicitly telling us they agree. They can never come out and say it, but by calling it digital gold and reiterating that talking point over and over and over again, they essentially are saying the internet and us were in cahoots together. That's great for Bitcoin. It's actually great for the Federal Reserve because by finding common ground, they now establish a common point of agreement, which then establishes some degree of credibility again with the internet. So they say, hey, we know that you don't believe us about monetary policy, inflation, all this stuff that actually used to matter. But you know what, you internet people, we're good on this one topic. And so they say, hey, you know what? Okay, cool. We agree on one thing. We still disagree on 90% of other things, but like we got one together. And I think that this is the road back to the Federal Reserve gaining some credibility with the internet age, is you got to get wins on the board. And so by finding that Bitcoin is digital gold and talking about it that way, I think that you can start to actually pull these things back together.
As the Fed fumbles, Bitcoin proves its worth as the new frontier of freedom and financial equality. But the fight isn't over. Whether you're a seasoned investor or a curious newcomer, understanding this shift is crucial. Don't miss future interviews as we bring you more insights from industry leaders. Subscribe, like, and share this video to stay informed about the revolution in real time.